The wind sweeping across the desert floor carried the sharp, metallic scent of hot brass and the acrid smoke of diesel burn-off. The sun was a brutal white coin in a sky bleached of all color, baking the forward operating base into submission. Inside a cramped, sweltering operations tent, Sergeant First Class Marcus Mark Thorne stood rigid, his eyes scanning the topographical map spread across the folding table. His thumb and forefinger pinched the bridge of his nose, in a futile attempt to stave off the thundering headache brought on by the heat and the situation. He was the leader of a 6-man Army Ranger reconnaissance team, the best eyes and ears the battalion had in the treacherous mountain passes of eastern Afghanistan. For the past 72 hours, they had been observing a village, a suspected waypoint for high-value Taliban leadership. The intel was cold, the villagers were uncooperative, and his men were exhausted. The canvas tent flap rustled, and a burst of furnace-like air announced the arrival of Captain Miller, the company commander. The look on his face was one Marcus had learned to read years ago, the look of a man about to deliver an order he himself didn't fully agree with. "Marcus, we're pulling you out," Miller said without preamble, tossing a thin folder onto the map. Marcus blinked, confusion cutting through his fatigue. "Sir, we've got eyes on a compound. Another 48 hours, and we might have something concrete on this Taliban council meeting." Miller shook his head, his jaw tight. "Change of plans. There's a special operations team moving into the area, a joint mission. They're sweeping through to the north, and Command wants us to provide a forward staging point and QRF. Your team is the closest. You're to secure this ridgeline here," he said, tapping a spot on the map about 3 clicks east of their current position. "It's a dead zone. No cell service, spotty comms. It's a perfect LZ for their insert. You hold it until they link up with you." Marcus studied the new coordinates. It was a nasty piece of terrain, rocky, exposed, and overlooked by higher peaks. "Sir, this position is a sniper's dream. We'll be sitting ducks if someone's up there." "I'm aware of the tactical assessment, Sergeant," Miller replied, his voice softening for just a moment. "But this is bigger than us. The team coming in is Tier 1. They have a specific window. You just need to provide security for a few hours until they arrive and can sanitize the high ground themselves." There was no room for argument. Marcus simply nodded, his mind already shifting from reconnaissance mode to defensive positioning. "We'll move out at last light." Miller placed a hand on his shoulder. "Be careful out there, Mark. Something about this feels rushed. Intel's sketchy on who else might be in those hills." As the captain left, DeMarcus turned back to his team. There was Donovan, his hulking, easygoing assistant team leader from Texas, who could carry a mortar tube like it was a backpack. There was Corporal Jensen, the wiry, sharp-eyed sniper who saw the world in terms of wind speed and range to target. Patel, the young but brilliant radio man and medic. Kowalski, the bruiser with a penchant for demolitions. And finally, Privates First Class Rodriguez and Hayes, the newest members of the team, solid and eager. 7 men, including himself. They were a family, a unit forged in the fires of countless patrols. "We've got a new dance number, boys," Marcus announced, his voice steady and calm, the voice that had talked them through countless tight spots. "Pack it up. We're moving to higher ground. We're playing welcoming committee for some very important guests." The men grumbled good-naturedly, the familiar rhythm of packing up gear taking over. They were professionals. Thus, a change in mission was just another variable. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the jagged mountains in hues of orange and purple, Marcus Thorne and his 7 Rangers melted into the shadows, moving towards a ridgeline that would, in a few short hours, become the most terrifying place on Earth. They had no idea that the help coming for them was not what they expected, and that the key to their survival would be a woman they didn't even know existed. The night march was a silent, grueling affair. The Rangers moved in a single-file line, a ghost column navigating by the faint light of a crescent moon and the cold green glow of their night vision. Each man carried over 100 pounds of gear, ammunition, water, radios, weapons, the weight digging into their shoulders with every jarring step. Marcus led from the front, his M4 carbine held at a low ready, his eyes constantly scanning for the telltale signs of an ambush. The terrain was brutal. The loose shale slid under their boots, threatening to send men tumbling into the rocky ravines below. The air grew thin and cold as they gained altitude, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the day. Donovan, bringing up the rear, kept a constant, silent count of the men in front of him. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. He'd been doing it on every patrol for a decade. It was a superstitious habit, a way of keeping his family safe. As long as he could count to 7, and everything was right in his world. They moved for 4 hours, pausing only for quick, silent hydration breaks. Finally, Marcus raised a closed fist. The column stopped instantly, every man dropping to a knee, facing outwards. They had arrived. The ridgeline was a bare, wind-swept spine of rock, offering a panoramic view of the valley below and the darker, more menacing peaks that rose to the east. It was exactly as exposed as Marcus had feared, and he quickly directed his men into a rough defensive perimeter. Donovan set up the M24OB machine gun behind a small outcropping of rocks, its wide mouth covering the most likely approach. Jensen, the sniper, found a shallow depression and began building a hide, arranging rocks and scrub brush to camouflage his position. Patel set up the radio, hissing quietly as he tried to raise the incoming Special Operations team. Static was the only reply. "Still nothing, Sarnt," Patel whispered, the frustration evident in his voice. "This valley is a black hole." Marcus just nodded. They were on their own for now. He looked at his watch. The team was due to insert by helicopter in just over 3 hours. They just had to hold tight, stay quiet, and wait. He settled in behind a rock, pulling his night vision away from his eyes for a moment to let them adjust to the natural darkness. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind. It was too quiet, and he could feel it in his bones, that prickling sensation on the back of his neck that every combat vet knows, the feeling of being watched. He was about to whisper a warning to Jensen to sweep the eastern ridge with his scope when the world exploded. The first crack of a high-powered rifle was unlike the pop of an AK-47. It was a sharp, thunderous whip that echoed off the canyon walls. Jensen, who had been scanning the opposite ridge, gave a sudden, choked gasp and slumped forward in his hide, his rifle clattering against the rocks. Before anyone could even react, the chatter of RPK machine guns erupted from 3 different directions, stitching lines of tracers across the Ranger perimeter. Rock chips and dust exploded around them. "Contact front, contact left!" Donovan roared, the shock of the attack immediately replaced by the cold fury of the fight. He dove behind the M24OB, the stock slamming into his shoulder as he unleashed a torrent of return fire towards the muzzle flashes on the eastern ridge. Marcus scrambled to Jensen's side, pulling him down behind cover. One look at the corporal's pale face and the dark stain spreading across his chest told him everything. He was gone. A cold knot of rage and grief twisted in his gut, but he pushed it down. There was no time. "Patel, get on the horn! Mayday! We are under heavy contact!" I say again, heavy contact. "Multiple directions. We need immediate support. Air support. Anyone!" Marcus yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. Patel was already working the radio, his fingers flying over the dials. "Mayday, mayday, mayday! Any station, this is Ranger 6-1. We are taking effective fire at coordinates." He rattled off the numbers, desperation creeping into his voice. "We need immediate close air support. Multiple enemy, I say again, multiple enemy." For a terrifying moment, there was only static. Then A faint, crackling voice broke through, barely audible over the roar of gunfire. "Ranger 6-1, this is Shadow Lead. We hear you. ETA. 2 hours. Hold what you have. 2 hours." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. They'd be overrun in 20 minutes. The volume of fire was simply too heavy. He could hear Kowalski yelling in pain as a ricochet caught him in the shoulder. Rodriguez was pouring suppressing fire down the slope. At his young face a mask of terror and determination. "It's a fucking ambush!" Donovan screamed over the din. "They've got us zeroed! There's too many of them!" Marcus looked at his men. He looked at the dark, indifferent mountains. He looked at the direction of the heaviest fire, the eastern ridge. Jensen was dead. Kowalski was wounded. They were pinned down, outgunned, and outnumbered. And then, in the flash of an enemy tracer, he saw them. Dark shapes. Moving with terrifying speed and precision, bounding down the slope on the eastern ridge. There were at least 8 of them, using the terrain with the skill of seasoned hunters. They were trying to get an angle, to flank the Ranger position and finish them off. 8 hostiles on the eastern ridge, Marcus shouted to his men, his voice a raw cry of defiance. "They're maneuvering on us! Shift fire!" But even as he gave the order, he knew it was futile. And his men were pinned down by the machine guns. They couldn't get a clear shot at the maneuvering squad without exposing themselves to the murderous crossfire. They were trapped. The 8 figures continued their advance, disappearing behind a large rock formation, only to reappear closer, their intent clear. They were going to get to within grenade range and wipe the Rangers off the face of the ridge. "Patel, get back on that radio," Marcus screamed. "Tell them we're not going to make it. Tell them—" His words died in his throat. A new sound had joined the chaotic symphony of war. It wasn't the deep-throated roar of a machine gun or the pop of an AK. It was a single, impossibly sharp crack. Then another, and another. It was a sound Marcus knew intimately. It was the sound of a high-caliber sniper rifle. But these shots weren't coming from the enemy. They were coming from somewhere else, from an angle Marcus couldn't immediately identify. He watched, mesmerized. And as one of the maneuvering hostiles on the eastern ridge suddenly stopped, his body going limp as he crumpled to the ground. A second later, another dark figure pitched forward, his weapon clattering down the rocks. A third shot rang out, and the enemy machine gunner on the left flank went silent, his weapon slewing to the side as he fell away from it. The ambushers were confused. Their deadly, coordinated assault began to falter. The RPK fire slackened. The 8-man squad, now reduced to 5, he hesitated, their momentum broken. They started looking around, trying to find this new, invisible threat. One of them pointed towards a rocky outcrop even higher up the mountain, a position so sheer and exposed it seemed impossible for a human to reach, let alone fight from. Another crack. Another man fell. Whoever this shooter was, they were not just shooting. They were surgically dismantling the enemy attack with a calm, to terrifying precision that Marcus had only ever read about in history books. He could see the rounds impacting, the enemy fighters dropping as if they had simply decided to lie down. They were being taken out from the top down, the squad leader, the machine gunner, the point man. It was a masterclass in tactical marksmanship. "Who the hell is that?" Donovan breathed, ceasing fire for a moment to stare in awe at the carnage unfolding on the ridge. "I don't know," Marcus whispered back. "But keep shooting. Give them cover. Don't let them know where our guardian angel is." The surviving enemy fighters finally broke. The ones caught in the open on the eastern ridge tried to scramble back up the slope, seeking cover. It was a fatal mistake. As they exposed their backs, the unseen sniper took full advantage. One fell, then the last 2. In less than 2 minutes from the first mysterious shot, the eastern ridge fell silent. The 8 hostiles who had them trapped were dead, and the RPKs, now without direction or support, fell silent one by one. The enemy fighters in the other positions, realizing they had just lost a full squad to an unseen ghost, began to melt back into the darkness, dragging their wounded with them. The attack was over. A profound, ringing silence fell over the ridge, broken only by the moaning of the wind and the ragged, desperate breathing of the surviving Rangers. Marcus crawled over to Kowalski, applying pressure to his wound. But Patel was already there, his medic's training taking over. Donovan kept the machine gun trained on the dark slopes, his knuckles white on the grips. "Get a head count," Marcus ordered, his voice trembling now that the adrenaline was starting to ebb. "Check everyone. Report." One by one, they called out. "Hayes, okay. Rodriguez, okay, but in shock. Patel, okay. Kowalski wounded. Donovan, okay. And Jensen was gone." Marcus closed his eyes for a second, saying a silent goodbye to his friend. Then he looked up at the impossibly high, dark outcrop where the shots had come from. He could just make out the faintest flicker of movement, a shadow detaching itself from the rock. "Whoever you are," he whispered into the wind, "thank you." An hour later, as the first hints of gray dawn began to lighten the sky, Marcus heard the distant thump, thump, thump of helicopter rotors. This time it wasn't a threat. It was the cavalry. The Blackhawks crested the ridge, their dark shapes a welcome sight. As they flared for landing, kicking up a storm of dust and debris, a team of dark-clad operators spilled out, moving with the fluid grace of apex predators. They were SEALs. Their team leader, a man with a hard face and cold eyes, approached Marcus. "Ranger 6-1, I'm Lieutenant Commander Hayes. We heard your mayday, pushed it as hard as we could. We're sorry for your loss." He looked at the scene, at the bodies of the enemy fighters littering the eastern ridge. "Looks like you boys did some serious work." Marcus shook his head, his face etched with exhaustion and grief. "That wasn't us. We were dead. We were sitting here waiting to die. We had 8 hostiles maneuvering on our flank. We were trapped." He pointed towards the high outcrop. "Someone up there took them out, every single one. A sniper. Probably the best shot I've ever seen." The SEAL commander followed his gaze, on a flicker of something, surprise, recognition, crossing his face. He looked back at his own team, his eyes landing on one of his operators who was just then sliding down a rocky incline to join the group. The figure was smaller than the others, carrying a modified M2010 sniper rifle that looked almost comically large against their frame. They moved with an economy of motion, head down, hood up. The operator pulled back their hood, and Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. It wasn't a man. It was a woman. Her face was streaked with camouflage paint, but her eyes were clear, calm, and utterly devoid of the adrenaline rush that still gripped the Rangers. She slung the massive rifle over her shoulder and walked up to her commander. "Sir," she said, her voice quiet and steady. "High ground is secure. No further contacts." The SEAL commander, her father, placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of pride that needed no words. He turned back to the stunned Ranger sergeant. "Sergeant Thorne, meet Petty Officer First Class Sarah Hayes. She's our sniper. And apparently, your guardian angel." Marcus could only stare. He looked at the dead enemy fighters on the ridge, then back at the calm, unassuming woman in front of him. He thought of his own training, of the years of combat, of the raw, terrifying power of that ambush. And he thought of the precision, the courage, and the sheer, unbelievable skill it had taken to climb to that impossible position in the dark and, alone, dismantle an entire enemy squad to save 7 men she had never met. The story of the female SEAL sniper who took on 8 hostiles alone wasn't a myth. It had just saved his life.